Heartache Connoisseur Podcast. I am your host, Marty Carpenter, coming to you from flyover country. Glad you could join me. Today, well, let's see. We're going to talk about sleep, mood, bipolar disorder, the changing of the seasons, the light, the weather, the temperature, the latitude. I've had a handful of nuts out of the can, and I've got some coffee here next to me. I'm trying coffee today. We'll see what that does to the broadcast. I usually drink water. So I'll probably slurp. I'm just going to get this out of the way right now. Hang in there with me, everybody. See, now that's not so bad. I just, I get some criticism sometimes from my slurping and drinking on air. But what do you want me to do? I'm a biological entity. I've got needs. Liquid, fluid, caffeine. Anyway, so I deal a lot with people who have problems with their mood and problems with their sleep. And after doing this for a while, a little over a decade or so now, I've noticed some patterns that are important to point out and I think could help you understand yourself and others. It's almost like there's a myth that in our culture it's supposed to be the same all the time for everybody. You go to bed, you get your 7 or 8 hours, you get up, you go to work, you should be fine, right? You should sleep through the night. You should wake up after having slept soundly for a solid stretch with energy, and you should be able to go to work and do your job and come home and etc. Well, it's not like that for hardly anybody. I always think like people that operate like that are more the exceptions than the rule, and like children do that sort of sometimes, but when you become an adult, it's just seemingly impossible to get a solid good chunk of sleep regularly. And some of that's self-discipline and everything, but some of it has to do with our circadian rhythms and how they change over the course of a year. It is known to science that we fluctuate in terms of our sleep needs throughout the course of the year as the length of daylight exposure changes. We have receptors in our eyes that are not just for seeing, or not for seeing at all actually, but are for detecting light and brightness of light that are hooked right into our brain pathways involved in regulating sleep-wake cycles or circadian rhythms. And so essentially, in a nutshell, what happens is that during the winter, most people need a bit more sleep, and during the spring and the summer, you need a little bit less. In the winter and the fall too, we'll include the fall and the winter in one group, and the spring and the summer kind of in a second group. And I want to just talk about normal people first. Normal people will notice mild fluctuations. Maybe they can get by on an hour or two less of sleep in the spring and the summer without causing them much trouble. They might feel sleepier earlier in the evening in the fall and the winter, and find it a little more difficult to get out of bed when it's still dark out, etc. These are things you already know and are intuitive. Now take this to an amplified degree, and you run this all the way out to an extreme, and you have bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is heavily linked to the circadian cycle. Some have argued that that's the primary pathophysiology. I don't know. But almost always, people that suffer with bipolar disorder are prone to episodes of their illness around the changing of the seasons, usually worse in the fall in terms of depression, worse in the spring in terms of mania. Mania you can think of just as the opposite of depression. And now here's my speech on bipolar disorder. It sounds scary. It sounds weird. It sounds nuts. It sounds crazy. We don't want to know or think about people who have this because they might show up in our driveway, waving a shotgun, we think, or something like this. But that's really not the case most of the time. In fact, I have been prone to say and preach that A lot of people have a little bit of bipolar disorder. So start with this premise that everybody has these seasonal fluctuations in their sleep and also their mood too, usually at least a little bit. Of course, low mood being fall and higher mood being spring. And you begin to get this understanding, this deeper understanding of why you feel the way you do to some degree. Biology doesn't exactly explain everything. I mean, you still have life stressors, life events, things that go on in your life that can certainly stress you, that can make you prone to experience depression at any time, or mania for that matter. Sometimes stressors can trigger mania. But let me paint a little picture for you. This is a typical person who maybe doesn't quite meet the official DSM criteria for bipolar disorder, but has enough seasonal variation in their mood to be noticeable, especially when pointed out to them their own behaviors. But let's say this is a person that's never been in trouble with the law. Their marriage has stayed intact. They have basically been functional throughout the course of their lives with a few blips on the radar. Every fall and winter, they notice feeling sluggish, needing a little more sleep, sometimes falling asleep in front of the TV at 6 or 7 p.m., then a hard time falling asleep at 10 or 11, then a heck of a hard time getting out of bed. Some tendency to want to eat carbs, maybe putting on a few pounds over the fall and the winter. Just less motivation, less energy, but not really super sad. Everything's going okay, still going to work every day, relationships are staying intact, etc. And here comes spring. Now we're energetic. We were sleeping 8 hours or 9 hours. Now we're sleeping 5 or 6. We're feeling good. We're popping right out of bed. We're starting projects. We're going to the store, buying stuff we need to make things, crafts and gardening and around the house kind of stuff. Maybe we go shopping and we spend a few $100. That maybe that's a little bit out of character for us. Maybe we buy a new car. So maybe we become a little bit more interested in sexual behaviors, or even strike up some new relationships, new friendships, new romantic interests, etc. Again, nothing outside of the realm of what is considered socially acceptable necessarily, but you can see that there's a bit of a fluctuation there in tendencies, behavioral tendencies. I would call this to some degree normal. But now let's take this same person in the spring and dial it up a few notches. Now instead of a few $100 at the mall, we're going out and buying $60,000 cars we can't afford. We're meeting new friends out at the bar on Saturday night, and the next day we're buying a brand new Harley Davidson motorcycle. We decide it's a good idea to move to Las Vegas out of the blue suddenly and join a burlesque dance troupe. We start a business that we have no business starting. We start a barbecue business and we have no idea how to cook pork. We start dressing provocatively. We're preaching on the street corner. We're at the gas station telling people we're Jesus Christ. Now this is kind of the extreme. We become maybe promiscuous or hyper-religious, believing we're hearing directly from God or that we in fact are God. These kinds of things. And now take the other end of the spectrum to an extreme. Instead of a little bit of grumpy irritability, low mood, carb cravings, sleeping too much, now we don't want to or can't get out of bed. We're despondent. Nothing in life has any meaning. We take no pleasure. We wake up in the morning miserable, anxious. We stuff our faces with desserts, brownies, pasta, Twinkies, cakes, breads. We're putting on weight. We feel terrible, like we're wearing a lead suit. We get our feelings hurt easy. That kind of thing. Now that's depression, and specifically atypical depression, and the type of depression that is most prominent in the fall and the winter. And if you start ping-ponging back and forth between those two states, you have bipolar disorder. So, I wanted to bring this to your attention because a lot of people come into my office around this time of year. I've noticed this the last few weeks. People that don't have bipolar disorder are suddenly not sleeping well because the days are getting longer. I mean, the shortest day of the year is like December 21st or 2nd. And, now we're pushing into almost March here. And people can feel it. Their biorhythms are changing. And so it's waking up in the middle of the night, having a hard time getting back to sleep, feeling a little restless, not wanting to go to bed, but not necessarily huge decompensations with respect to daytime energy levels. You might not sleep as well, but you can still do okay during the day. And it's not to be concerning, really. I mean, this is me fighting back against this belief that we all have that it should all work right all the time. And what I'm telling you is that it's always in flux, and that for the most part, our mood, our energy level, our sleep requirements, our appetite, our craving for certain foods, the general tenor of our relationships, our outlook on life, a lot of our relationships and friendships, these things are always in flux. And it is largely related to, I believe, the changing of the seasons. Simple as that. A lot of the variability that we experience in our lives throughout the course of the year, partly, at least partly, at least a little, probably more than we realize, has to do with planet Earth and our trip around the sun. Some people believe, myself included, that probably there's a evolutionary component to this if you consider hibernating bears and things like this. And lots of animals hibernate and go into more dormant states. That bear's depressed. Let's think of that bear as depressed. He's just laying down. He doesn't want to do anything. He's super sleepy. He just gorged. He's fat. He needs to lay there and burn off some fat. Now, this is left over perhaps in our brains. And you can think about survival in the wilderness. And in the spring, you got to get a lot of things done. You got to build your shelter. You got to find your crops. You got to hunt. You got to care for young. And in the winter, maybe you take a load off. It's too cold. Now you're hunkered down. You got to survive. Your metabolism, you just sort of just go into a lower activity state and push through the hard times. And that I think carries forward into modern day a little bit and rears its head and looks a bit like just sort of the normal seasonal variability that many of us experience. Now, the farther north you go, the more pronounced this is. The more change in the length of daylight that exists where you are, the more that you become or may become aware of this. The closer you are to the equator, the happier you are on average, studies have shown. Which isn't that interesting? The other thing that's worth pointing out is that when our mood goes down, it's like putting on glasses. Imagine you put on glasses that make you see everything negatively. That's what it's like. I call them crap-covered glasses. You look around and everything just feels ugh. And we want to, in those moments, it's very tempting to want to blame people, blame circumstances, make assumptions that we've made bad decisions, perhaps, or that we need to make a change. Maybe you don't actually. Maybe the people around you aren't as bad as you think, and you just kind of need to push through a time. And in the spring, it can feel awesome. We can start a lot of things. We can get excited about things, start projects. We can have 5 or 6 things going, and then fall comes along, and we leave, half of those things undone, and we beat ourselves up, and that's my point, is that some of this stuff is to some degree outside of your control. And if you become aware of your patterns, if you do have these patterns, I think it takes some of the pressure off, where you can just kind of say, well, this is kind of how it's going to be. And then maybe take note for you personally, approximately when you notice a return to what you might call normal baseline. So if it's January and you're feeling lousy, you're a month or two away probably from noticing quite a bit of improvement. and that can be hopeful. There's a number of folks that I treat with medications for seasonal depression and bipolar disorder, where we adjust their med regimen like clockwork throughout the time of the based on the time of the year, to address what we know predictably is going to be their emotional state at any given time. So we go up on their antidepressant, let's say in the fall, and down or clear off in the spring, or maybe we bump the mood stabilizer up in the fall and the spring to prevent episodes. It just depends on what the person happens to be responding to. Now, there is a caveat here, too, that I need to point out, and that is that in both depression, bipolar disorder, really any mood disorder, these episodes are not always correlated to the time of year. They can occur anytime out of the blue, without a doubt. And also, I will say this, that sometimes in the fall and the winter, instead of seeing depression, you see more of an irritable, sad, mixed, manic-y kind of state where people become both depressed and highly agitated, and sometimes even hyper energetic at the same time. And you can see that a similar phenomenon in the spring as well. And we have a term for that. It's called a mixed episode. And a lot of people have this, and it goes unrecognized, where it's just, you kind of want to roll, you kind of want to crawl out of your skin. You're kind of sad sometimes, kind of energetic others. You'll have 2 really bad days, 2 really good days. You're all over the place. That's what I mean. That's kind of this, we call it a mixed state, and it's usually a period of transition between seasons. Like I say, tends to show up in really early spring and really early fall, late summer is when I start to notice that. And then a lot of times that will kind of sink into either a full-on depression or a full-on hypomanic or manic state. So there's a few thoughts on that. I mean, it's important that if you have these symptoms and they are causing you trouble in your life to a degree where, maybe you quit your job. I mean, I've seen this. I've seen people that cannot hold a job through the fall and the winter. Like every year or two, they get depressed predictably, like clockwork, and they end up quitting their job. Or the inverse is true with mania. Every year or two, like clockwork, somebody will go hypomanic, start running their mouth. They'll get impulsive. They'll say stuff to their boss. They'll get in trouble, and they'll end up losing their job. And 4 months later, they're back to normal going, oh, I can't believe I did that. Oh, my God. Or break up with somebody, or even have affairs. I mean, this is sort of a dirty little secret, but sometimes these behaviors that get us into a lot of trouble occur during periods of time where our brain chemistry isn't right. And it's not that we excuse it, but it does help us understand, especially if we're a partner for somebody who suffers with one of these illnesses, that we may have a little bit more insight into why people are doing what they're doing. People get hypomanic, for instance, and start going to the casino all the time and blowing a bunch of money. Maybe they start buying plane tickets and traveling and going all over the place and spending money they don't have and getting into trouble in various ways. So it's easy to do in that state. You don't have good insight. When you get elevated, when your mood gets higher, it feels great. Nobody thinks they have any kind of a problem. I mean, what are you talking about? This is the best I've felt in years. Nobody comes into the doctor going, hey, can you help fix this extreme bliss that I'm feeling right now about life and everything in it? They don't do that, but they do sometimes come in depressed. And this, by the way, this bipolar disorder goes undiagnosed. I think sometimes statistically up to 10 years on average before it's properly diagnosed. It gets called depression for years by the family doc, by the family, by the person themselves. People have a really hard time putting 2 and 2 together when it comes to patterns that evolve over really, really long periods of time, like over years. But you watch. One way to really diagnose this accurately is to start tracking your mood on the calendar. Just write down maybe, or on your phone. I'm sure there's a million apps that do this, but Just jot down out of 10, how's your mood every day, just quickly, and you watch the patterns that they will emerge. You'll notice that your numbers tank a little when it's dark, and rise up a little when it's light for a lot of folks. So, yeah, we're here to help. I mean, I love treating this illness, and it's very poorly understood. And there's a couple other things that you need to know that are really important, and this may be the most important thing of all to know about this phenomenon. But so, like I say, people who are a little bit more on the depressed side, they go to the doctor more regularly for help. And if the only part of the story that's being told to the doctor, usually a family doctor or a general internist, is the depression piece, they're going to get almost every single time an antidepressant, which makes sense, except that if you have underlying bipolar disorder, antidepressants are known to make the condition worse, destabilize it, sometimes switch you rapidly into a state of agitation or full-on hypomania. And this is why we exist here, why we psychiatrists exist. And so your family doc might start getting nervous if you've taken a couple antidepressants and you're not getting better. They might say, well, this is a little bit out of my league, and they're right, and they should refer at that point. And I will tell you this, if you have taken antidepressants and you've had some agitation and mood swings when you take those, and you tend to get, I don't know, rapid insomnia, racing thoughts, and that sort of thing, you may, in fact, have a tendency for a little bit of bipolar, and you need to get that checked out to make sure. Now, not every time is that the case, but if you have a pattern of antidepressants being very bad for you, making you feel crazy, then you probably need to be evaluated by a specialist to see if you might benefit from a different form of treatment, namely a mood stabilizer or possibly an antipsychotic medication. So, do the things that you need to do to stay well. You need to also install habits that help push you in the direction of stability. So if you tend to get a little on the high side, sometimes you do need to make sure that you're disciplined in getting your sleep, getting your exercise, watching the caffeine or stimulant consumption, watching the substances. You need to keep your chemical soup as clean and predictable as possible. One of the pillars of treating mood disorders is regularity, predictability, schedules, sticking to them, self-discipline. That helps a ton. Man, it is really hard to treat people who have rotating shift work who also have bipolar disorder, where they're 2 nights overnight and then 2 nights off and 2 nights day and 2 nights. That's just virtually impossible to stay stable with your mood if you're doing that kind of work. So if you find yourself resonating, that's a conversation with your boss or your doctor, and getting some accommodations made, if possible, for you at your job. So build your lifestyle a bit around your natural tendencies. Don't just assume you ought to be able to do it the exact same way all the time, all year long, no matter what. You may find that just doesn't work very well, that you need to budget in time, let's say in the winter, for more sleep, or you need to prepare for the notion that in the winter you may not be as productive, and it's okay, and you don't need to beat yourself up, and you may gain a few pounds. So what? You'll lose them in the spring. And in the same way, in the spring, be careful. Don't get yourself in over your head. Start one thing at a time. Finish it until, only do one until it's done, and then the next thing. And try not to get too scattered, and maybe ask a friend, am I getting out of line here? Am I talking over you? Am I getting big ideas that don't make any sense? You can get some input from the people in your life sometimes. They frequently see it better than we do. So, well, anyway, there's a little bit of off the top of my head rundown on this whole kind of seasonal thing with the sleep and the mood. 'Tis the season right now. These are the days where I really start seeing this in my practice quite a bit. So, Hey, thanks for listening. I appreciate it very much. Feel free to donate to my Patreon page. It makes it possible for me to do this to a professional degree and continue to think about ways to improve this and get better at it. And it is a service to you. So if you go to the heartacheconnoisseur.com and scroll down, you'll see a link to my Patreon page. And if you like this, if it's helpful, please share it. Please post it. Please do whatever you want with it. And I would appreciate that very much. I see online when I look at my statistics that, let's do this real quick. Let's just pull this up. Let me see here. That my audience it's spreading a little bit, and it's a cool feeling to think about this thing, finding its way out there. It looks like last week, or I checked it over last weekend, and in the 7 days preceding, the top 2 listening cities were Youngstown, Ohio, and Mountain View, California. And it looks like Mountain View, California is still they're number 1 now, and that's over the last 7 days. And they're overtaking my hometown, and the town where I went to school, and the town where I grew up. And so, hey, Mountain View, thank you. Somebody's telling their friends out there. I appreciate it. We get some people in New York. We get some folks in, I don't know, Louisiana, and looks like Arizona, and just, it's a neat feeling, and I hope that people all over the place find this helpful. I mean, what an amazing thought. If we take what we have to offer the world and put it in a form that's accessible and accessed efficiently, we can really help steer this world, I believe, in a more positive direction. That's my point with this, really, is I'd love to see anybody and everybody who benefits from this information find a way towards a little bit better life. So thank you for participating in that with me and spending time listening, and etc. So we will see you next time, and have a great day. Have been